Life in prison. The judge's voice sliced through the courtroom like steel, sharp, deliberate, final. The words didn't echo, but they didn't need to. They landed like a sledgehammer in Ruth Davidson's chest, not for what she did, but for who she chose to save. The gavel struck once, hollow and cold. Ruth didn't flinch, didn't cry, didn't beg. She just sat there, hands cuffed in front of her, jaw tight, her eyes locked on a spot on the floor in front of the judge's bench. The world around her blurred, the cameras, the whispers, the weight of strangers deciding her fate. None of it felt real. She was 67, widowed, no children, no living family. And now she was being walked out of a courtroom with the label murderer hanging around her neck like a noose. But deep in her bones, she knew the truth. She knew why she was here, and it had nothing to do with guilt. She whispered beneath her breath, so low only she could hear it. I'd do it all again. 2,000 miles away, in a sleek corner office overlooking the Boston skyline, Harry Whitaker was standing perfectly still. His phone buzzed on his desk, unanswered. The voice on the news was droning in the background, and on screen was her face. He hadn't seen her in 27 years, but he'd know that face anywhere. Older, thinner, but unmistakably her. Ruth Davidson. He leaned closer. The volume was already up, but somehow the room felt silent. The news anchor's voice cut through the air. Local woman sentenced to life in prison for her role in a murder-for-hire plot. Prosecutors say Ruth Davidson orchestrated the killing of a businessman with alleged ties to organized crime. The mugshot faded in on screen. Harry gripped the edge of his desk, knuckles white. It couldn't be. "Mama Ruth," he whispered, his voice cracking like it hadn't in years. Gavin Morales sat in a luxury apartment in downtown Dallas, half listening to the same broadcast. He was scrolling through email, glancing at Q3 projections, the usual. But something made him freeze. The anchor repeated her name again, and this time it clicked. He turned, eyes locking on the screen. There she was. He fumbled the remote, turned the volume up, staring like he'd seen a ghost. She was older now, sure, but that quiet strength in her eyes, that defiant stillness, that was the woman who had once patched up his knee with dollar store ointment after he'd been shoved from a moving car. The woman who gave him his first toothbrush and taught him how to spell Gavin in block letters on the front of his school folder. And now she was in chains. He sat down slowly, like the weight of 27 years had just come crashing back. He didn't blink. In a hospital just outside Chicago, Edward Lamont was charting vitals for a gunshot patient. Beeping monitors, harried footsteps, controlled chaos. And then a nurse flicked on the breakroom TV. He caught her name out of the corner of his ear. His pen slipped from his hand. He turned slowly, disbelief in every movement. There was Ruth, in a courtroom, wearing an orange jumpsuit, silent, alone. He forgot about the patient, forgot about the beeping machines and trauma bay. All he could see was the woman who had once spooned tomato soup into his mouth when he was too sick to get out of bed. Who sang to him in the dark. Who fought every system, school, welfare, police, just to keep 3 broken kids together. And now, she was alone in a courtroom, staring at the floor like she was already dead. Back in Bakersfield, California, the courtroom had emptied. Ruth sat alone on a bench in the holding area, fluorescent lights humming overhead, the cuffs still pressed against her wrists, sharp, metallic, impersonal. She didn't cry. She'd already done all her crying in the first 6 months of the trial. Now there was only numbness and memory. She remembered the way Gavin used to sneak extra sugar into the oatmeal when he thought she wasn't looking, how Harry always tried to fix broken things around the house, wobbly chairs, flickering lights, even though he barely knew how. How Edward, the quiet one, would fold laundry just to be near her when nightmares kept him from sleeping. They were her boys. Not by blood, not by law, but in the way that mattered, the kind of love that didn't need permission. And now they were gone, scattered, grown, too far away to hear the sound of a gavel slamming a door shut on her life. She whispered it again. I kept them safe. That night, on 3 separate flights from 3 different cities, 3 men sat in window seats, silent, wide-eyed, barely breathing. Each of them had thought they'd buried the past. But tonight, it had clawed its way out of the grave, wrapped its hands around their throats and demanded they look back to the porch light that had been left on, back to the shelter of a woman's arms, back to the day she saved them. And now, they were going home. The sun was setting by the time Gavin Morales touched down in Bakersfield. It was strange, the smell of the air, the way the palm trees lined up like old sentries along the freeway. He hadn't been here since he was 12, but the moment he stepped off the plane, he felt it, that pull in his chest. Like the past was reaching up through the cracks in the pavement to drag him back. He took a cab straight to the motel, no detours, and waiting in the parking lot, arms crossed, pacing, was Harry. He looked exactly the same and completely different all at once. Tailored jacket, grey at the temples, same jawline that always clenched when he was thinking too hard. They didn't say anything at first, just stood there staring. Two men who used to fight over cereal boxes and whose turn it was to use the good blanket on the couch. Finally, Harry broke the silence. "She looks old." Gavin swallowed hard. "She is old." Edward pulled up 5 minutes later, scrubs still on, bloodstains on his shoes. He didn't wait, just stepped forward and wrapped both of them in a hug. For the first time in 27 years, the three of them stood shoulder to shoulder, and none of them knew what to say. The next morning they sat in the visitors' waiting area of the county detention center. Fluorescent lights, cheap chairs, the kind of place built to make people feel small. And then the guard called out, "Davidson, you've got 3. The door opened, and Ruth walked in, flanked by 2 officers, wrists cuffed in front of her, her steps slow and even. She looked at them, all 3, and smiled. It was the kind of smile that tried to be warm but never made it past the eyes. The kind of smile someone wears when they're trying not to fall apart in public. They rose to their feet, almost in sync, and for a few seconds, none of them moved. It was Harry who finally stepped forward. "Hey, Mama Ruth." Her lips trembled, just barely. "Look at you," she said, taking in his expensive suit, the way his voice had dropped an octave since she last heard it. "You made partner?" He nodded. "And you?" She looked to Edward. "Are you the one who sends me all the articles about nutrition and blood pressure?" Edward smiled for the first time. "Yeah. Figured you'd ignore 'em if they came from the state." She turned to Gavin. "And you still don't know how to stand still?" Gavin blinked. "I'm sorry." "For what?" she asked. "For not coming sooner." She looked at him for a long moment, and then, finally, sat down across from them. "You came now," she said. "That's what matters." For a while they just talked. About nothing and everything. About the time Edward put dish soap in the dishwasher and flooded the kitchen. About the fake Christmas tree Harry insisted they put up every year, even though it was missing half its branches. About how Gavin once spray-painted, "We live here too," on the fence when the neighbor's kid said foster kids didn't count. There was laughter. Real, aching, fragile laughter. But underneath it was the silence. Because none of them had said what needed to be said. Finally, Harry leaned forward, voice low. "They said you killed Eli Carter." Ruth's jaw stiffened. "I didn't." "But you knew him," Edward said. Ruth looked down at her hands. "I knew a version of him. A long time ago." Gavin's voice was sharp. "He's the one, isn't he?" She didn't answer, because she didn't need to. The weight in the room said enough. That night, the 3 men sat together in the old diner off Route 58. The same one Ruth used to take them to when she had a few dollars extra from her janitor job. The booths were the same, red leather, duct-taped seams. The menu hadn't changed either, neither had the guilt. "I don't get it," Gavin muttered, stirring his coffee. "Why now? Why frame her after all these years?" Harry answered without looking up. "Because someone knew she'd never defend herself." Edward nodded. "Because she's poor, Black, and alone. It's a story the system likes to write." Gavin's eyes were glassy. "She saved us." Harry's voice cracked. "And now she's paying for it." There was silence. A heavy, brutal silence. And then Gavin leaned back and said what none of them wanted to admit. "She went to prison for saving us, Let me ask you something, and if someone took you in when the world threw you out, if they gave you love, safety, and family when you had nothing, would you fight to save them, no matter what it cost? Drop your answer in the comments, because that's the question these three men have to answer now. The next morning, the motel room was thick with silence. Three grown men, once brothers in everything but blood, sat around a small round table with papers spread between them. Police reports, court transcripts, newspaper clippings Harry had printed on the red eye. The air was stale with leftover takeout and the weight of things unsaid. Gavin rubbed his temples. This is insane. They had her fingerprints on the gun. They had bank deposits, security footage. Harry shook his head sharply. Fabricated or planted. The footage is grainy, the timestamps are inconsistent. And those deposits? Cash, no trail. Somebody wanted it to look airtight. Edward leaned forward, elbows on his knees. His voice was quieter. But what if she did do it? The words hit like glass shattering. Gavin snapped his head toward him. Don't even say that. Edward held his gaze. I'm saying, people change. 27 years is a long time. We don't know what she went through after we left. Harry slammed a hand on the table. She doesn't kill, that's not who she is. You think the same woman who worked 3 jobs so we could eat is out here hiring hitmen? No, I don't buy it. Edward sat back, eyes clouded. I can't lose her twice. If we go all in and we're wrong... Gavin cut him off. We're not wrong. The conviction in his voice was absolute. But beneath it was fear. Fear of being let down. Fear of being the kid who had once believed in miracles and had them ripped away. Later that afternoon, Harry walked the streets of Bakersfield alone. The town hadn't changed much. The corner laundromat, the dollar store with the flickering neon sign. Even the same cracks in the sidewalk he remembered tracing with his sneakers. When everywhere he looked, he saw her. Ruth Davidson, 27 years younger, smiling through exhaustion, carrying grocery bags too heavy for her frame, keeping the porch light on long past midnight, waiting for boys who might never come home. He stopped outside the small house where they once lived. The paint was peeling worse than he remembered, the porch steps sagging. But he could still hear their laughter inside, still smell Ruth's cornbread baking in the oven on Sundays. And he remembered the night he left, the way she hugged him too tight, kissed his forehead and whispered, "Make me proud." He had. But he'd done it without her. And now, standing in front of the house that once saved his life, he wondered if that made him a coward. Back at the motel, Edward sat on the bed flipping through an old shoebox he'd dug out of Ruth's things. Letters, unopened letters. She had written to all of them. Birthdays, holidays, random Tuesdays, telling them she loved them, telling them she was proud, asking if they were warm. And none of them had written back. His chest tightened as he held one envelope closer, his name scrawled across the front in Ruth's handwriting. Inside, a photo, him at 13 holding up a science fair ribbon, Ruth's hand on his shoulder. He blinked hard, jaw trembling. She hadn't forgotten. She had never stopped loving them. But they had stopped showing up for her. That evening, the three of them sat in the car outside the detention center. No one moved to get out. "She's innocent," Harry said flatly, staring out the windshield. Edward didn't answer. "Say it," Harry pushed. Edward clenched his jaw. "I want to believe that." Gavin leaned forward from the back seat. "Then believe it. Stop making excuses." Edward snapped, turning around. "You don't get it. I've seen what happens when people lie to themselves. I work in an ER. Every day people come in swearing their husband wouldn't hurt them, their kid didn't mean to overdose, their father didn't walk out, and then reality slaps them in the face." His voice cracked. "I don't know if I can take that slap again." Silence filled the car. Heavy, suffocating. Finally, Harry spoke, softer this time. "Reality. Reality is that woman fed us when we were starving. She shielded us from fists that weren't meant for children. She made us her sons when no one else wanted us. That's the only reality that matters to me." Gavin's voice was steel. "And if we don't fight for her now, then who are we? Huh?" Just 3 selfish kids who ran off and forgot the one person who ever gave a damn? The words hung in the air. None of them had an answer. Inside her cell, Ruth lay on her bunk staring at the ceiling. She could feel it. They were here. She hadn't seen them all together yet, but she knew the air was different. The guards whispered. She closed her eyes and let the memory wash over her. 3 little boys standing on her porch that night, soaked from the rain, hungry, terrified. "Please," the oldest had said, "we don't have anywhere else to go." And she had opened her door. She hadn't thought twice. Now, decades later, she wondered if that one act of love was the reason she was here. Maybe love was a trap. Maybe kindness was the rope the world used to hang you. Her heart twisted at the thought, because if she believed that, then everything she had lived for meant nothing. And she couldn't let it mean nothing. In the motel room later that night, Gavin stood by the window watching the neon diner sign flicker across the street. He spoke without turning. "We can't just sit here. We need to dig, talk to people, find the truth." Harry nodded immediately. "I'm with you." Edward hesitated, then finally sighed. "Fine. But if we do this, we do it right. No half measures. We find evidence. We make it stick." Gavin turned, a fire in his eyes. "Then it's decided." Harry looked at them both. His voice was low but steady. "Now it's our turn." The room fell silent again, and somewhere deep in the quiet they all knew the same thing. If they were wrong, they could lose her forever. The county detention center smelled like bleach and fear. Steel doors groaned open one after another, and each time the sound made Gavin's stomach tighten. He glanced at Harry, who looked every bit the lawyer he'd become, crisp tie, polished shoes, but his jaw was locked, and his hands kept flexing like he wanted to punch something. Edward trailed behind them, scrubs wrinkled from the red eye, exhaustion written all over his face. They were here together. 3 men who hadn't sat in the same room since they were kids, and the weight of that silence pressed against all of them. A guard led them down the hall. 10 minutes, no physical contact. The room was small, nothing but a table bolted to the floor and 4 metal chairs. The walls were beige, the kind of beige meant to strip a person of memory and warmth. And then the door opened. Ruth Davidson stepped inside, her wrists cuffed in front of her. She wore the same orange jumpsuit as the day before, but her shoulders carried a weight the uniform couldn't explain. For a moment no one moved. Then Edward stood, unable to help himself. "Mama Ruth." Her eyes softened. "Baby." The guard gestured for her to sit. She lowered herself slowly into the chair across from them, chains rattling faintly as she settled. The silence was heavy, like the pause before a storm. It was Gavin who finally broke it. "You look different." Ruth raised an eyebrow. "So do you." The hint of a smile flickered across her lips, but it vanished just as quickly. She studied each of them in turn. The lines around Harry's eyes, the tension in Gavin's shoulders, the quiet heaviness Edward wore like armor. "You grew up," she said simply. Harry's throat tightened. "We didn't come here to talk about us." Her gaze sharpened. "Then why did you come?" The question landed hard. Gavin leaned forward, voice low but firm. "Because you're sitting in a cell for something you didn't do." Ruth's hands twisted against the cuffs. "You don't know that." "Yes, we do," Harry shot back. "We know you." "Do you?" Her voice cut through the air, sharper than they expected. "It's been almost 30 years, Harry. You think a woman doesn't change in 30 years?" Edward shifted in his chair. "People don't change that much." Ruth's eyes glistened, but her tone stayed steady. "People change when they're forced to. People change when life keeps breaking them down." She looked away, her gaze fixed on the corner of the room where the paint had peeled. "I'm not the woman you remember." The silence that followed was unbearable. The hum of fluorescent lights, the faint click of the guard's pen outside the glass. Finally Gavin leaned forward, his voice rough. "You're the only mother we ever had." Her head snapped toward him. "Don't romanticize it," she said flatly. I was a woman with a busted sink and a part-time job. I fed you, sure, but I couldn't keep you. I couldn't give you what you needed. And eventually you left." "We didn't leave," Edward said, his voice trembling. "We got older. We got scared. We thought—" "You thought I didn't need you anymore," Ruth interrupted. The words sliced through him like a knife. Harry pushed the papers across the table, clippings, transcripts, the police reports. "We've been reading, we've been digging, this case against you, and it's paper thin. They pinned this on you because you had no one to fight for you." Ruth stared at the stack without touching it. "They said I killed Eli Carter." Her voice was hollow now, almost detached. "You didn't," Harry said. But she didn't answer. Edward leaned in. "Mama Ruth, he's the reason we ended up on your porch that night, isn't he?" Ruth's jaw tightened. "Isn't he?" Edward pressed. Her eyes flickered with something, fear, rage, memory. But she stayed silent. The guard tapped on the glass. 5 minutes. Gavin slammed his palm against the table. "Enough of this. Stop protecting people who wouldn't think twice about burying you. Tell us the truth, Ruth, please." Her eyes filled with tears. She looked at him, at all of them. The boys she had once rocked to sleep, the boys she had fought for when no one else would. And she whispered, "I kept you safe, that's all I'll ever say." The guard opened the door. "Time's up." Ruth stood, chains rattling, and the 3 men rose with her. She looked at them one last time, her voice steady again. "Go home. You don't belong here." Then she was gone, the door slamming shut behind her. Outside, the California heat pressed against them. Harry paced by the car, furious. She's still protecting someone, after all these years. Edward leaned against the hood, staring at the asphalt. "She'd rather go to prison than drag us into it." Gavin's hands shook as he lit a cigarette, something he hadn't done in 10 years. "She already dragged us into it. We just didn't realize until now." The smoke curled upward, vanishing into the hot sky. The 3 of them stood there in silence, bound by a truth they couldn't ignore. They were stuck, with her, with each other, with a past that wasn't finished with them yet. The motel room was dim except for the glow of a single lamp on the nightstand. Empty coffee cups and crumpled papers littered the small table between the 3 men. Harry sat upright, scanning yet another copy of the trial transcript. His tie loosened, but his expression unrelenting. Edward sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, eyes hollow from exhaustion. Gavin paced the floor, cigarette between his fingers, the smoke curling up toward the ceiling fan that only half worked. None of them had spoken in almost 15 minutes, because all 3 were thinking the same thing. Ruth was hiding something. Finally, Gavin stopped pacing. "You know what I can't get out of my head?" Harry didn't look up. "What?" "That night. The night we showed up on her porch." Edward lifted his head slowly, his voice low. "I think about it too." Gavin shook his head, exhaling smoke. "It wasn't random. We didn't just wander to her door. We were running. From him." Harry closed the transcript, his hand trembling slightly. Eli Carter. The name dropped like a weight in the room. Edward leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "I used to dream about him. The grey coat. The way he looked at us like we were property." Gavin's voice cracked, sharp with anger. He wasn't just some neighbor. He had people, connections. Ruth never told us the whole story, but I knew. I could feel it. Harry pressed his palms together, thinking aloud. She never said his name, not once. She just kept saying, "You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you again." Silence. And then Edward whispered, "Maybe she didn't just protect us. Maybe she made enemies because of us." The weight of his words filled the room, because it was true. They hadn't been just 3 hungry kids on a stranger's doorstep. They had been running from something darker, something Ruth had stood against when no one else would. Harry finally spoke, his voice clipped. "Then Eli turns up dead, and the state says Ruth paid someone to do it. It's too convenient." Gavin frowned. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying this case isn't about murder. It's about erasing her, silencing her. Maybe Eli's people decided it was time to finish what they started. Edward shook his head. If that's true, then the trial wasn't just sloppy. It was deliberate. They wanted her gone. The words sat heavy between them. That night, Harry couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the motel ceiling, listening to the faint hum of traffic outside. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Ruth sitting at that cold table, whispering, "I kept you safe." And suddenly he was 10 years old again. He could smell the rain-soaked clothes clinging to his skin. He could hear Gavin crying quietly, trying not to wake Edward. And he could see Ruth, standing in the doorway holding a towel in her hands, her face filled with both fear and defiance. She had let them in, without hesitation, without knowing what it might cost. Harry turned onto his side, eyes burning. He had built his whole career on evidence, logic, law, but none of that could erase the truth of what he felt in his bones. She was innocent, and someone out there wanted her silenced because she refused to abandon 3 broken boys. The next day, Edward went digging. He drove to the old neighborhood, past the school where Ruth used to work as a janitor, past the corner store where they once scrounged for day-old bread, and finally to the street where Ruth's house still stood. It was smaller than he remembered, paint peeling, yard overgrown, but the porch light was still there, the one she had left on for them night after night. He stood there for a long time before knocking on the neighbor's door. An older woman answered, eyes narrowing at the sight of a stranger. Edward introduced himself, explained carefully that he had once lived with Ruth. Her expression softened. That woman, she had a heart too big for her own good. Edward swallowed hard. Did you ever hear anything about Eli Carter? The woman's face darkened. I heard enough. He was bad news. Everybody knew it, but nobody said a word. People like him, they had friends in high places. Edward leaned in. Do you think Ruth would ever... The woman cut him off sharply. No, that woman wouldn't even kill a spider. She'd scoop it up and set it free outside. You think she'd pay someone to kill a man? No, but I'll tell you this. If she's in prison, it's because someone wanted her there. Edward stood there, the truth pressing down on him. Ruth had been right all along. She wasn't just protecting them. She was standing against something bigger. And now she was paying the price. Back at the motel, he told Harry and Gavin what the neighbor said. Harry's jaw tightened. Then we're right. She was framed. Gavin nodded slowly, his voice low but determined. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Let me put this to you. If you were in their shoes, would you walk away to protect your own life? Or would you dig deeper, knowing the truth might destroy you too? Comment below. I want to hear what you'd do. The motel room was quiet, except for the faint hum of the air conditioner in the corner. Outside, the neon diner sign flickered, buzzing faintly like it was fighting to stay alive. Inside, 3 men who hadn't shared a roof in nearly 3 decades sat together, not as the stranger's life had turned them into, but as the boys Ruth once saved. Harry leaned against the headboard, sleeves rolled up, his tie long since abandoned. Gavin sprawled across the chair, tapping his cigarette against an empty coffee mug. Edward sat cross-legged on the bed, a shoebox of Ruth's old letters spread out before him. No one was speaking, but the silence wasn't hostile this time. It was heavy, yes, but not hopeless. Finally, Edward picked up one of the letters and read aloud. His voice was soft, almost reverent. Dear Edward, I know you don't write back, but that's okay. I just want you to know I'm proud of you. I hope you're still building things. I remember the way your eyes lit up when that toaster finally worked again. Don't lose that spark. Love always, Mama Ruth. His throat closed and he set the letter down quickly, blinking hard. Gavin rubbed his face with both hands. She kept writing. All those years she kept writing. Harry's jaw tightened. And we didn't. Edward shook his head. Don't do that, don't tear yourself up. We were kids, we didn't know how to stay. Harry's voice was sharp. I was old enough to know better. I should have stayed, should have fought to keep us together. But instead I left. The weight of his words filled the room. For a moment, none of them could speak. Then Gavin leaned forward, eyes burning. We all left. But don't twist this into some story about how we abandoned her. We were kids, Harry. Kids who'd already been abandoned a dozen times before. We didn't leave because we wanted to. We left because the world told us that's what kids like us were supposed to do. Edward's voice cracked. She deserved better than that. Harry looked down at his hands. She deserved everything. The silence stretched until Edward opened another envelope, this one addressed to Harry. Dear Harry, I hope you're still fixing things, not just chairs and lamps, but people too. You've always had a way of putting things back together. One day, you'll see that about yourself, and when you do, you'll change the world. Love, Mama Ruth. Harry closed his eyes, pressing a fist against his mouth. She believed in me before anyone else did. Gavin's voice softened. She believed in all of us. He picked up his own letter, his name scrawled across the front. The paper was worn, the ink faded, but the words still cut deep. Dear Gavin, I know you're restless. I know sometimes you think running will make the ache go away. But no matter where you go, you always have a home, right here, with me. Don't forget that. Love, Mama Ruth. His hands trembled. He swallowed hard, blinking fast. I forgot, he whispered. I forgot I had a home. For the first time that night they laughed. It wasn't loud or carefree. It was brittle, fragile, but real. They laughed about the time Ruth tried to fix the leaky faucet with duct tape and ended up flooding the kitchen. About how Edward once built a radio from scraps and Ruth danced to the static just to make him smile. About how Harry tried to patch Gavin's jeans with hot glue, nearly burning the fabric. And Ruth made them both lemonade as if it were the funniest thing in the world. For a moment, they were boys again, safe, loved, home. But the laughter faded, and the reality came crashing back. She's sitting in a cell right now, Harry said quietly, and we're here drinking cheap coffee, reading letters. That's not enough. Edward looked up. Then what do we do? Harry's eyes were sharp now, determined. We fight. We find out who really killed Eli Carter. We prove she was framed. Gavin shook his head slowly. You think it's that simple? The people tied to Eli, they're dangerous. Ruth tried to shield us from that. If we go digging, we might end up right where she is. Or worse. Harry leaned forward, voice low but unyielding. I don't care. She didn't flinch when she opened her door to us that night. She didn't hesitate when she stood between us and the world. I won't flinch now. Edward exhaled shakily. If we do this, there's no turning back. Gavin stubbed his cigarette into the mug. Good. Then we don't turn back. The clock on the nightstand ticked past midnight. The three of them sat in silence, the glow of the lamp painting long shadows on the walls. And for the first time in nearly 3 decades, they weren't just men with different lives, different cities, different scars. They were brothers again, bound not by blood, but by the love of a woman who had given up everything for them. And now, they were ready to give everything back. The next morning, Bakersfield woke under a grey sky. Clouds pressed low, heavy with rain that hadn't yet fallen. In the motel room, the tension was heavier still. The laughter and fragile peace from the night before had vanished, replaced with a sharp Harry edge sat that at the none small of them wanted table, to name,
his laptop open, documents spread in messy stacks. His eyes were bloodshot from working through the night. Edward leaned against the dresser, arms folded tight, his jaw clenched. Gavin paced like a caged animal, the soles of his shoes wearing grooves into the carpet. "We need to move fast," Harry said, his voice clipped. "I've already found inconsistencies in the trial records. The DA suppressed evidence. If I can file an appeal..." Edward cut him off. "And then what? You think the system's suddenly going to work because you showed up with your fancy degree?" Harry's eyes narrowed. "That's how it works. You build a case. You present the facts." Edward's voice rose. "Facts don't matter when the deck's stacked. You think I don't see that every day? You think I don't watch patients die because they couldn't afford the right doctor, the right hospital, the right chance? You really think a courtroom is going to save her?" Harry stood, fists tightening. "And what's your plan? Sit on your hands?
Cry over old letters while she rots in a cell? Gavin slammed his palm against the wall. Enough. The room fell silent. He glared at both of them, his chest heaving. This isn't about proving who's smarter. This is about Ruth. She's the one sitting behind bars while we argue like kids again. But Harry wasn't done. His voice was low, dangerous. No. This is about guilt. You can't stand to face her because you're terrified she'll see the truth, that you left and never came back. Edward's face went pale. He stepped forward, trembling with rage. Don't you dare put that on me. You think you're the only one carrying guilt? You left too, Harry. You hid behind your books, your law degree, your perfect suits. You left just like I did. Just like Gavin did. Gavin's voice cracked. We all left. Harry spun toward him. At least I built something. At least I fought to climb out of that hole. What did you do, Gavin? Ran from city to city, blowing money, hiding behind cars and women and smoke? You're still running. The words cut deep, sharper than any knife. Gavin's hands curled into fists, his whole body shaking. For a second, Edward thought he might actually swing. But instead, Gavin turned away, slamming the bathroom door so hard the frame rattled. The sound echoed through the room like a gunshot. Silence. Harry sat back down heavily, the fire gone from his face, replaced with something quieter. Edward stared at him, his voice low and broken. You think this is how she wanted it? For us to tear each other apart while she carries this alone? Harry didn't answer. He didn't have to. The truth was written in the slump of his shoulders, the way his hands shook when he tried to type again. Hours later, they found themselves back at the county jail. The guard ushered them into the visitation room again, but this time Ruth didn't smile when she saw them. She looked tired, older, the lines on her face deeper than before. Harry sat stiffly, Edward beside him, Gavin across the table. The tension from the motel followed them into the room, thick enough to choke on. Ruth studied their faces, her voice soft but steady. What happened? No one answered, so she looked at Gavin first. Baby? He shook his head, staring at the floor. Then Edward. His jaw trembled, but he stayed silent. Finally, Harry. He met her eyes, but his voice cracked. We don't know what we're doing. Her lips pressed into a thin line. You think I didn't know that? They all looked at her. You think I don't remember what it was like? 3 boys who couldn't agree on anything, always fighting, always breaking things, always scared. And me trying to hold it all together with duct tape and prayers. Her voice wavered. But you were mine, even when you fought, even when you left. You were mine. Tears stung Gavin's eyes, but he didn't let them fall, he whispered. Tell us the truth. Ruth looked down at her cuffed hands. Her silence said more than words ever could. That night the brothers didn't speak much on the drive back. The rain finally broke, slamming against the windshield in heavy sheets. The wipers struggled to keep up, the sound filling the space where their voices should have been. In the back seat, Gavin stared out the window, watching water blur the streetlights into streaks of gold. In the front, Harry gripped the wheel, jaw tight, while Edward sat beside him, fingers tapping nervously against his knee. They were together, but more divided than ever. At this point in the story, let me ask you something. If your family was on the line, would you risk tearing yourselves apart to fight for them, or would you walk away to protect what's left? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. The rain kept falling, heavy and relentless, and somewhere deep inside each of them, one question pulsed like a heartbeat they couldn't ignore. If Ruth Davidson was going to survive this, could they survive each other long enough to save her? The storm carried into the night. Sheets of rain battered the motel roof, thunder rolling low across the valley. Inside, the brothers sat in silence, each man weighed down by a storm of his own. They had fought. They had bled old wounds into the open. And now, what remained was quiet. Not peace, never peace, but the quiet before something breaks. Harry sat at the table, his laptop glowing against the dark. Documents and case law littered the screen, but the words swam, refusing to settle.
He pressed his palms against his temples, trying to force the fog away. He had spent his whole life mastering control. Every word, every gesture, every case built on discipline. But tonight, all of it slipped through his fingers. He remembered being 10 years old, his hands wrapped around a mug of hot cocoa Ruth had made. He had been shaking, his voice too small to steady, and she had said, "Drink, baby. You're safe here." She had made him believe it, that safety could exist, that someone could care without asking for anything back. And now, she was the one unsafe, and the system he had devoted his life to was burying her alive. For the first time in decades, Harry wondered if everything he'd built meant nothing without her. In the bathroom, Gavin sat on the edge of the tub, cigarette unlit between his fingers. The rain against the window sounded like footsteps, steady, relentless. He thought about all the running he'd done, from town to town, job to job, always chasing something he couldn't name. Freedom, maybe. But no matter how far he ran, he always carried the same ache. He saw Ruth's face in his mind, the way she used to hum while stirring oatmeal soft and steady, like the world outside didn't exist, the way she had slipped an extra biscuit into his pocket when she thought he wasn't looking, the way she had kissed his forehead once, just once, the night he thought nightmares might swallow him whole. "Don't run from this one," he whispered to himself, but the cigarette shook in his hand. Edward sat outside under the awning, rain blowing against his scrubs. He didn't care. He had lived his whole adult life surrounded by pain. Hospitals, trauma bays, the sound of monitors flatlining in the middle of the night. He thought he had built immunity, but Ruth broke through that, always had. He remembered the way she used to check his forehead with the back of her hand, her touch gentle but firm. The way she had stayed up through the night when fever racked his body. The way she whispered prayers he didn't understand, rocking him until morning came. He clenched his fists, staring into the rain. He couldn't save every patient. He had to. Back inside, Harry closed the laptop and pushed it away. His reflection in the black screen stared back at him, older, harder. But behind the lines and the suit, he still saw the boy Ruth had once saved. "I can't walk away," he said aloud, though no one was there to hear. In the bathroom, Gavin flicked the unlit cigarette into the trash. His voice was rough, almost a growl. "She saved us. I'm done running." Outside, Edward rose from the chair, soaked to the bone. He whispered into the storm, "I'll give her my life if I have to." They didn't know it yet, but in 3 separate corners of that motel, each man had made the same choice. Not pride, not self-preservation, but love. The kind of love that cost something. The kind of love Ruth Davidson had shown them 27 years ago when she opened her door. An hour later, the 3 of them sat back in the room, wet clothes dripping, exhaustion carved into their faces. No one said much, but something had shifted. The fight, the bitterness, the guilt, all of it had been burned down to ash. What remained was resolve. Harry finally broke the silence, his voice steady again. "Tomorrow we stop waiting, we stop arguing, we dig, we find the truth, we don't stop until she's free." Gavin nodded once. "No matter what it costs." Edward's voice was quiet, but fierce. "Even if it kills us." The rain outside slowed, tapering into a steady drizzle. But inside the room, the storm was just beginning. The morning after the storm, the air in Bakersfield was heavy and clean. The brothers stood outside the courthouse, jackets pulled tight, determination etched into their faces. They weren't boys anymore. They weren't fractured men either. They were family. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with low chatter. Reporters shuffled papers, cameras clicked, and the prosecutor adjusted his tie with a smugness that made Harry's blood boil. At the defense table, Ruth Davidson sat shackled, her eyes fixed on the wood grain, her posture calm, too calm, like a woman resigned to being erased. Then the doors opened. 3 men strode in, Harry in his suit, papers in hand, Gavin with fire in his eyes, Edward in scrubs, hair still damp from the motel shower. The room shifted, heads turned, whispers spread like wildfire. They didn't look at the crowd. They looked at her, And Ruth, for the first time in weeks, lifted her head. The judge raised an eyebrow. "And who are you?" Harry's voice was steady, commanding. "We're her sons, Your Honor, and we have evidence," the prosecutor scoffed. "This is highly irregular. The case is closed." But Harry stepped forward, dropping a thick folder onto the bench. Not when the case was built on lies. Not when evidence was deliberately suppressed, the judge frowned. "Explain," Gavin leaned in. "The bank deposits they claimed were bribes. We traced them. They came from an account tied to Eli Carter himself, funneled to look like Ruth's." Edward held up a flash drive. "And the fingerprints on the gun? The lab technician signed an affidavit. He was pressured to alter results. We have his statement." Harry added, "And the grainy security footage? We found the original. Timestamps were doctored. Ruth Davidson was at work the night Eli Carter was killed." The prosecutor's face drained of color. The judge sifted through the documents, eyes widening. "These are serious allegations." Harry's voice sharpened. "They framed her because she was poor, because she was black, because she had no one to fight for her. Well, she does now." He turned, looking directly at Ruth. His voice softened. "She always did." Ruth's eyes filled with tears. Her boys, had come back. The judge leaned back, tapping his gavel against the bench. "I will grant an immediate stay of sentencing pending review of this new evidence. Bailiff, remove her restraints." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The cuffs clicked open. Ruth's hands for the first time in months were free. She lifted them slowly, staring at the red marks etched into her skin. Then she looked at the three men standing before her, and in that moment, time collapsed. She didn't see suits or scrubs or lines carved by years. She saw muddy sneakers by the back door. She saw three boys huddled at her kitchen table, sipping cocoa with trembling hands. She saw family. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds as Ruth stepped onto the courthouse steps. The press swarmed, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward, but none of it mattered, because Harry was at her left, Gavin at her right, Edward just behind her, and together they walked her down the steps, the world watching. At the bottom, Ruth stopped. She turned to them, her voice trembling. "You shouldn't have come back." Harry smiled faintly. "We had to." Edward shook his head. "You saved us." Gavin's voice cracked. "Now it's our turn." She looked at each of them, her eyes glistening, her lips trembling, and then, for the first time in 27 years, she pulled all three of them into her arms. The hug was awkward, crowded, messy, but it was real. And Ruth Davidson, who had once opened her door to three terrified boys, now felt their arms around her, strong and steady, holding her up when she thought she couldn't stand. That night, back at the motel, they sat together again. No lawyers, no evidence, no fear, just family. Edward leaned back against the headboard. "You know, I still have the scar from when I fell off that bike in the alley." Ruth chuckled softly. "You mean when you tried to ride it with no hands?" He laughed. "Yeah, that one." Gavin grinned. "I still remember the taste of your cornbread. Nobody makes it like you." Ruth smiled. "That's because nobody burns it the way I do." They all laughed, the sound filling the room like light. For a moment, it felt like they had gone back in time. Like nothing had been lost. Like everything had been found again. Harry grew quiet, staring at his hands. Then he looked at Ruth. "I never said thank you," he whispered. She frowned. "For what?" "For saving us." Her eyes softened. She reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "Baby, you already did. You lived." The room fell quiet again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was full. Because Ruth knew now that love hadn't been wasted. It had multiplied, grown, carried across decades, and her boys, her men, had come back to prove it. "So let me ask you one last thing. Do you believe true love, the kind that chooses family even without blood, can survive time, distance, and trials this heavy?"
Share your heart in the comments, because that's what this story is really about. The neon diner sign flickered outside. Rainwater still clung to the pavement, and in that small motel room in Bakersfield, a woman who had been condemned found freedom again. Not because the system gave it to her, but because 3 men, once 3 scared boys, came home to save the mother who once saved them.